Well, here we are back again, week 6. And you can see I brought all my friends with me. So this little book, we're going to have a fun little activity this week that if you want to watch it, you can. If not, don't worry about it. But we talked about what we want to be when we grow up last week. So I found this little book that I read to Mackenzie, so I thought it might be something you would enjoy. So Jesus is off-roading with me again. You know, we talked about doing the Brave Girl devotional, and then I found this one, and we read from it last week. Well, this week, God just keeps putting the word promise into my heart. So I came across a wonderful devotion one day, and I love this devotional. It's gotten me through some pretty rough times. It's called Streams in the Desert, and it was about promises. And so it's from really May the 1st was the day I read this. And today's Bible story is about Abram, who eventually becomes Abraham. And there's a promise that God makes to him. And so in one of our previous stories, we talked about Noah and the flood. And then there was something that happened after the flood that God made a promise to him. And that was the rainbow. And God always makes good on his promises. When he showed him that rainbow, it was a promise that he would never destroy the earth again in that way by flooding it. And we still see the remnant of that promise all these years later, because when it rains like that, we still see the physical proof of God's promise. And so that word is just really marinated, resonated within me this week. And so God just said, let's camp here with the promise. And so today you're going to hear that in our fun little Bible story. And I also wanted to... you're going to hear a word called covenant. And that's a big word that means basically a promise. So a covenant. God will make a covenant with Abram, who eventually becomes Abraham, that he's going to be the father of a great nation. And he's older. Like in the next week's story, he's 99 years old when God says you're going to be the father of a great nation. He's going, what? Like, I'm not going to have a child at this age. But with God, everything is possible. So today's devotional is about having faith to believe God's going to follow through with the promises. So here we go. The verse is from Titus chapter 1 verse 2, and it says, God who does not lie promised. God does not lie. Faith is believing that something is going to happen with absolute certainty. Recognizing God's promise as an actual fact, believing it is true, rejoicing in the knowledge of the truth, and then simply resting because God said so. He promised it. We don't need to fret and worry about it, although I do that sometimes, honestly. But it's believing God's going to follow through with what he said he's going to do. Faith turns a promise into a prophecy. A promise is dependent upon our cooperation. Did you hear that? A promise depends on our cooperation. So when we exercise genuine faith in that promise, it becomes a prophecy. Then we can move ahead with certainty that it will come to pass because God does not lie. I often hear people praying for more faith, but when I listen carefully to them and get to the center or the basis of their prayer, I realize it's not for more faith that they're wanting. What they're wanting is their faith to be changed to sight. Faith does not say, I see this is good for me, therefore God must have sent it. Instead, faith declares God sent it, so it must be good for me. Faith, when walking through the dark with God, only asks you to hold God's hand more tightly. Get that? I think sometimes when we're going through a dark place and we're scared and we're like, okay, but God promised, God promised, God promised. And then all of a sudden we start depending on other people, on our own power or our own strength to do something. Faith asks us to hold God's hand, even in the darkness when we can't see what's going to happen. There's a verse in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, and it says, we live by faith, not by sight. Faith is believing that something will happen or come to pass even when we can't see it. That's faith. And so today in our story, when we talk about Abram, God is going to make a covenant, a promise with him. And you're also going to hear another word as we're going through these lessons about him being a patriarch. And a patriarch basically means he's the head of that family, the head of that tribe, a father figure. And so there's several patriarchs that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about Abraham and then his son Isaac, and Isaac's two sons, Jacob and Esau. And then Jacob has 12 sons. And so when you hear that word, don't be afraid of it. It's patriarch, and that just means the head of, or the leader, the male figure or leader of that nation. So hold on. We've got some fun things coming up. Hang on to the promises that God's given you, even when you can't see it, because he's a good God, and he wants you not to depend on the things that you see, because when you're in the darkness, remember the promises that he's given you. Stay tuned.